Japanimation Station.
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. This week on the show, we are continuing our Season 2 journey into the Ufotable Moon Works. Last week, we talked about the first two movies in Kokutou no Kyoukai, also known as The Garden of Sinners, the movie adaptations of the Kinoko Nasu novels. And today we'll be talking about the next two films. The third movie, Garden of Sinners, The Remaining Sense of Pain, and the fourth movie, Garden of Sinners, The Hollow Shrine.
Indeed, parts 3 and 4, where I think the table is fully set by the end of these two, and I feel like I have not my head around everything. There are still mysteries and all sorts of interesting things remaining, but I do think this is where you kind of fully see the world kind of put together, and I am very excited to move on to the remaining ones, because this just so completely, pulls you into it. Like, if you are someone who, wants to watch these and kind of wants to know, when does it all sort of, kind of come together, so I kind of have the ground under my feet, I think it's these first four together, and particularly these two. I feel like I have the ground under my feet, so I'm very excited to talk about it.
Yeah, because basically, what happens here is that this, outside of some flashbacks and stuff like that later, this more or less concludes the sort of out of chronological order sequencing of the original novel, because by we've got movie 3 takes place a little bit before the first movie and sets up her having the artificial arm and stuff like that from the first movie, and then movie 4 is more or less takes place directly after the second movie, which gives us our whole setup. And so then movies 5, 6, and 7 happen in sequential order after this. So we've kind of more or less arrived now with all of our pieces in place to then bring us to the conclusion of the series. So I think, yes, it is very much these first 4 movies feel like they are giving you your full kind of place setting, with a couple of one-off stories giving you the kind of thematic and atmospheric stuff you need to give you the full scope of what Kokutou no Kyoukai is.
Yeah, so I'm really loving it, and I think something I'm just interested in talking about today, now that we've seen these 4, and as you say, these are the ones that are told out of order, which is what I thought, but I'm glad you confirmed it there, is just the sort of deep structure of these 4 and why they are ordered the way they are. I think, having seen it all now, I think it's extremely smart and interesting how they do it, and how they effectively sort of reverse action and exposition. Is really fascinating, and I'm excited to talk about that, because these 2 in particular play with that a lot, but all 4 of these, you can kind of put them together, and there's a lot of interesting structural things going on, so yeah.
Yeah, and I actually had not remembered how much these 2 movies are very paired, because the third movie sets up a lot of concepts like the mystic eyes of death perception that then are explained in the first, basically everything about the fourth movie is set up in some way through things you see near the end of the third movie. Which was, again, that was not an intentional thing in how I broke these out. I mostly broke these out this way so that we could have movie 5 be its own episode.
Because movie 5 is a big, giant 2-hour movie that's as long as the fucking Kimetsu no Yaiba movie and everything. I'm excited. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Paradox Spiral. Good name for a movie also. So where do you want to start, Sean, with parts 3 and 4?
Yeah, there's no real, other, there's no, history stuff here. Again, this is covering these as movies, again, they're more like big TV episodes, so they were all in production at the same time when they started making them. So I think we can just jump right into movie 3, The Remaining Sense of Pain, which is probably like the most, I would say like the most harrowing in terms of like the most, to me, like thematically heavy of all of these movies because of the subject matter. This is when I gave the content warning at the end of the last episode that this movie is about sexual assault and rape. And so the main sort of character of the movie, in the sense of like the new character, Asagami Fujino, who is in the books, and this is the last of the books that I've read. I have not yet read the fourth section of the chapter, or fourth chapter of the novel yet. But Asagami Fujino gets the most narration in the book. Like, it's very much, she's like the primary POV character. I think that is a little bit less true of the movie, although she still gets a lot of like, she's still like a major POV character for the film. But yeah, so the movie is about her suffering this sort of like repeated assault by this group of young men until eventually she awakens to her special abilities and then goes on a murder spree in a way that's almost, to me, like reminiscent of like 70s sexploitation films, like that kind of like rape revenge archetype. It sort of steps its toes a little bit into that genre. And this movie 3 has always stuck with me a lot, with it's got a very rich like palette of symbols and like kind of like metaphors that I think it all kind of mixes together for Fujino's experience of what she is suffering from, and how that like unleashes into the world in this ability to twist and deform things that she observes. And it's always struck me as a very powerful story.
Yeah, I'm really curious and excited to hear your thoughts on all of it, because having seen it once last night and not like lived with it for several years, it throws a lot at you. It's very heavy. Mm-hmm. It's not just the subject matter, it is also the visuals of it. Like, it's a fairly graphic depiction of the assault itself, and then a extremely graphic depiction of violence. This is by far, of these first 4 episodes, the most violent there is. It's pretty hard to watch in places, the idea of the twisting of the bodies. It kind of amused me because, Jujutsu Kaisen has a character who does this, the Inugami, who like he doesn't talk, but when he does talk, it's because he has these powers. And in Jujutsu Kaisen 0, there's a big moment where he twists the like enemy demon, and he yells like twist, and then the demon like twists and like contorts and dies. But of course, it's a like silly cartoon demon. And in this movie, you're getting her yelling twist, but it's on human beings, and their arms and legs and everything break and start bleeding because the bones are probably cutting up all the blood vessels, and it is just incredibly dark. Of course, it's mostly happening to piece of shit rapists. Yes. So like, I think it is also intentionally challenging, and I think this is where it intersects with some of the exploitation movies you're talking about, Sean. It is intersecting with those ideas of pushing the audience to think about what they will and will not condone, and will not cheer for in these sort of like righteous crimes, because there's even a debate going on between our 3 main characters here, Touko, Kokutou, and Shiki, of like, is the murder justified? Is it completely wrong no matter what the reason is for? Or do we kind of, and Kokutou is kind of like in the middle of these extremes, kind of wanting to think about it, kind of wanting to resist the urge for violence, but also understanding it. And then there's all these other things that, as you say, symbolically get complicated, because the movie starts with her having this unseen injury that, we see it in so much as we see there's an assault, but we don't know the specific source of this injury she has when she meets Kokutou. And then we move on from there, and this injury keeps shifting what it is, what it means. Can it be healed? Can it not be? What does it stand in for? It's intentionally a very slippery, multivalent symbol that I think a lot of this movie starts from a place that's maybe pretty familiar in thoughtful stories about rape and sexual assault, the idea of the scars that you can't see and that, it doesn't go away, and then continually complicates and makes that symbol more and more multivalent and multi-meaningful. And in a way that, like I said, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as someone who's sat with this for longer, because there's so much going on in this one.
Yeah, because, yes, I think you're exactly right. That it feels like it's got this, like, big soup or something of different symbols that it is throwing together, where you've got Fujino's insensitivity to pain, right? So she can't feel pain, which is a thing we later learn is not a natural condition. It was something imposed upon her by her father, which I think is very significant, right? It's a way to suppress her powers. So she has like cut herself off from the world around her, as Touko defines it. This is a line I've always has stuck with me, is that like it's probably hard for her to even feel the sensation of being alive is probably hard for her to understand, because because insensitivity to pain is not just insensitivity to pain, it's insensitivity to physical sensation. And so that sense of like it's probably hard for her to even feel that she is alive. And she suffers these abuses that like the abuses become more intensive because she doesn't physically respond to it in any way because of her being closed off and her being insensitive, until it reaches this breaking point, awakens her powers. Her powers are to twist things that she sees, mostly people, into lumps of meat, as Shiki calls one of them in another scene that has just amazing dialogue. And then all that is also, you have this like mysterious abdominal injury where she's constantly like cradling her abdomen, which I think is again also like very symbolically suggestive with the rape, of like what is this pain, the remaining sense of pain, as it is called, that even though she has this insensitivity to pain, she is now feeling pain. That pain cannot go away. It is internal, and she has no way of removing it, and is destroying everything around her because there's nothing she can do about this pain she's now feeling. And so I think all of those things, that insensitivity, the like phantom pain she has, her magical powers, all that jumbles together into this very rich, I think, complex, very emotional series of symbols and metaphors that I don't think there's any way for me to like, I don't think there's a way to fully untangle, like, this is just what it is saying about, like, sexual assault and rape. This is what it is saying about pain and things like that. I think it is identifying how messy and complex all of these things are, and really, I think, challenging you to try to sort of come to grips with this bundle of, like, complex ideas it's throwing at you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think this is extremely thoughtful at a minimum, and I would say fairly, sensitive and well-intentioned depiction of sexual assault. And it's a very, 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 very tricky subject to tackle it's a tricky subject to tackle in any narrative medium. I think it is particularly tricky to tackle in any kind of visual medium like film or animation, because you have to look at it, or you have to depict it in some kind of off-screen way or suggest it. And it's always, questionable if you actually show any part of it. And it's not super graphic in what they show. There's some nudity and there's some violence, but like a lot of it is left to like, you're looking at her, you're not necessarily looking at the assaulters doing the thing. But anytime you show it, there is the, kind of trade-off of, are you just being exploitative? Are you being titillating to a certain, segment of the audience? Are you just, by showing this, are you unnecessarily triggering people? But do you need to show some of it to like make the reality of it? These are all like complex debates with no right answer. I think we've come to a place in sort of Hollywood and like American TV where I think it's generally just thought of like, don't engage with it because you're all so fucking terrible at it. It's kind of like, when you look at the brunt of, I think, like Hollywood and American TV media, it's just often very bad. I think Game of Thrones is probably the most emblematic example in recent years of something that uses rape quite a bit. And at its quote unquote best, I think it's a fairly surface level thing that it uses for fairly exploitative purposes to like make a like quick way to demonize a character and make another character sympathetic. And it feels very mercenary in that way, and sometimes it is just purely for a kind of dark titillation that I think is gross, right? And I think this is neither of those, and I think it's thoughtful in a lot of different ways. I think it brings up, like, for one, I think this movie understands the pathology of rape in a way that a lot of media doesn't understand, in that the whole idea of that you have this group of gang rapists and they become more violent because she can't feel pain. that gets its finger on something that I think is missing in a lot of depictions, which is that this isn't about dudes going and getting their rocks off. This is about a sense of power over someone. This is about sadism. This is about inflicting pain. There is no pleasure in it for them when they can't hurt the person. That alone, I think, is a insight that is true when you listen to people like, you know, therapists and medical professionals and people who've been through this and will talk about the actual pathology behind this, right? You know, you have fucking assholes like Donald Trump who will make comments about people like, oh, I wouldn't, you know, assault her because she's not pretty enough. And, you know, just completely misunderstanding, like, your mindset is so fucked up because that's not what this is about. This is about power and this is about domination. And also you are a fucking rapist. And like, I think this is a movie that just through that basic, you know, the fantasy metaphor that they start putting into it, just on that first order level, I think it has complicated it in a way that means it is having a serious discussion about it, you know?
Yeah. And I think, you know, and obviously like anybody is free to disagree if you feel differently about how well this deals with this topic. But for me, bare minimum, what I ask for from a piece of media, if it's going to be using this, and especially if it's going to show like direct depictions of it and everything, is it needs to be a story about it. It can't be a spice you throw on top. And that's like the big thing with Game of Thrones, is that typically, I mean, because Game of Thrones is almost never about anything, because that show didn't have enough of a focus with any one storyline to be about something often. But that's where rape felt like it was thrown into that show as a way to spice things up and to keep things exciting. You know, it was like a sexual assault scene was put into Game of Thrones for the same reason a fight scene was put into Game of Thrones. It was to keep the attention on the screen, to show something shocking in violence in the fight scene, and then, you know, a different kind of violence in an assault scene. Whereas here, it's like this whole movie is about this. It is not a thing that is thrown in to spice things up or to make something more exciting or to push a boundary. It is a story that is interested in this idea and is trying to like tackle it and untangle these and like interrogate this phenomena of sexual assault and the effect it has on the victims. And then also, as you say, like some of the pathology of the people who commit it as well. And that like the insensitivity to pain thing being like a symbolic or metaphorical way to tackle that problem. That to me is like, it's like the bare minimum that a thing needs to pass to be able to be something that I'm like willing to take serious on this topic and not just sort of be like, fuck off, like, why are you even doing this? Is it has to be about this. And it's very much, movie 3 is completely about this. Like, if you try to remove the depictions, you shouldn't even do the movie, because because the movie couldn't exist. The story can't really exist if you're not engaging with the material very directly as they do here.
I think you're right, and I think this is a good way to say it, because I think what people will often say is that if you're going to depict it, you have to take it seriously, and I think what you're saying is, well, how do you take it seriously is it has to be about that thing, right? Yeah. You know, and I think you're absolutely right about that, because there is just way too much media where it is a spice, it is a titillation, it is an exploitation, it is something like that, and you know, I do think the bare minimum for like getting in the room and being worthy of discussion is what this is. And again, yeah, obviously, if you look at what this movie is doing and you take issue with it, that's totally fine. I think what's important about this is that it's getting to the point where you could have a substantive discussion about it. Yeah. And I don't think there's a rape scene in Game of Thrones that is worthy of substantive discussion. No. There are scenes that are worthy of dismissal and scorn, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And this movie starts from the beginning. The first images in this movie are of the assault and of this thing happening. And it is very clear about what this whole story is going to be about. And it is messy. I'm not sure what I feel about every step of it along the way. All I am sure is that like it's meeting the viewer halfway. Like, it is trying to like open up and have a conversation and find something substantive to say about it. And that just, you know, that makes all the difference in the world, because I do think it's pretty rare to see something that meets that minimum threshold. As small as that threshold sounds, it's one of the toughest subjects you can actually engage with. And so to engage with it meaningfully, just you realize, I think, how rare it is when you see something that I think really does do it. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so let's like talk a little bit about this. I guess like I just want to start with talking about Fujino, you know, as our main character, and some of the stuff that you get with her, and to entangle some of like the metaphor and the symbol stuff. Like, one of the things that I think is obviously
immediately one of the most striking things about this movie is her powers. And as you're talking about earlier, the violence you see of it, because the like twist thing is a power that you see in some anime. You know, Jujutsu Kaisen does it. Some stuff before this has used that as like a conceptual power, is you're able to twist things in some way. But this is by far the most graphic and feels like realistic way I've ever seen that depicted as some sort of like supernatural ability, where it is like, what if you could just through psychic powers like wring someone's arm like it's a fucking towel, basically, you know, like it offers her ability to twist things is so powerful that the physical human body offers no clear resistance, and so she's able to twist arms and stuff to the point where they rip off because you have twisted it so much. Like, again, like you're twisting a piece of paper over and over again until eventually, once you've twisted it enough, it will snap, and you will have now two pieces of paper, right? And that's what she is doing to these rapists. But I think there's something like very evocative about the idea of like twisting being her power, that she is taking these people that are twisted, that are like wrong, right? The people who have done this to her are fucked up and twisted. And she is, through her power, turning them into something that is what they are. To me, it's like, right, you like this isn't, you know, I am making you what you actually are. I'm twisting you into the thing that you are meant to be, not the thing that you project yourself as, this normal human being walking around your day-to-day life, but you are twisted. And that connects to one of, I think, this my favorite pieces of dialogue and my favorite exchange in this movie, which is the first time Shiki encounters Fujino as she's murdering one of the rapists. And it is the one guy who says, like, he starts going delirious and just starts laughing. It's like, my arm is like a screw. It's a screw. It's a screw. And he slowly dies. And then Shiki walks up on this, like, what are you doing with that lump of meat? And Fuji says, it's like, what are you can't say that. It's not a lump of meat. He's a human being. And Shiki saying, he didn't die like a human being. No human being dies that way.
Right.
And if you don't die like a human, you can't be considered a human. You know, he has crossed over the edge of the boundary, and he has gone into the world of the unknown, of the unnatural. And so he can no longer be considered a human anymore. And that to me is a very powerful line of dialogue, I think. That's like, you have, because I think he isn't really a human, not in our like sort of moral and ethical sense we think of that term. Like, that guy has crossed over that moral and ethical boundary, and I think like Fujino has turned him into the thing that kind of he always was. He himself was this lump of like meat, this like sadistic flesh pile walking around inflicting pain on other people, and he has now been turned into this useless lump of meat on the ground.
Yeah, this is what I kind of started with. I was talking about the way this movie kind of understands the pathology and the nature of the crime, right? Like, this is, again, I think so much of like pop culture or just general discussion of rape misunderstands the, like, this is not someone is like horny and looking for a good time, and it's like normal sexual desire that is then output in an abnormal way. It is abnormal from the core, right? Like, it is twisted from the core to want to hurt someone. You know, sex is not about hurting people, it's about pleasure. Even if you're going into like, you know, BDSM or something, the whole idea of consent means that at its core it is still about mutual pleasure, right? And so the idea of that you and your friends are going to get together and your goal is to hurt someone. You're going to inflict pain by invading and harming their body and taking away their bodily autonomy. That is twisted. That is inhuman on that level, right? It is literally inhuman because you are going to strip someone else of something that makes them human, you know, which is their autonomy and is their, you know, ability to be at home in their own body. And I think that alone is just something that this movie has an idea and a point of view on that, and puts it into this very grotesque visual metaphor that then I think also tests the boundaries of catharsis to a certain extent, right? Because there is something about when you get this long sequence where Kokutou talks to Keita, who is the guy that Fumino is searching for. And Keita and Kokutou seems like they were friends once in high school, right? And now they're talking, and you just get this very dry, matter-of-fact explanation of what he and the gang rapists were doing. And Kokutou is sickened, and we are sickened. And then when you then go back to, but we don't start with what they did and then see the twisted bodies, right? We see the twisted bodies first, and then we see this. And so it's really testing the boundaries of that. There is something cathartic about when you know what he did. It's like, I want to see his body twisted. But when you see it, it is also brutal. That to see the actual nature of it done is brutal. And there's multiple sort of metaphors and discussions going on within that.
Yeah. And that scene in particular with Kokutou in Keita is like, it's powerful. You just have that shot of Mikia as he's listening to this, and his, it does the anime thing with the glasses where his glasses have like fogged over. You can no longer see his eyes. And it's like, I think it tests the boundaries of Mikia as a character. We talked about last time, he is this like almost uncomfortable level of like this font of compassion and kindness for people in a way that almost feels like pathological. And I think you get an extension of it here where, you can see that he is capable of feeling like this incredible intense rage, but he is still incapable of like, he's not going to sell Keita out. He's not going to kill him himself, or he's not going to ask Shiki to do it. He is still never going to cross that line. Like, he still has like, there's something about who he is as a person that he cannot like accept that isn't like that is allowable, that kind of violence, even when you have been pushed to that end, where it's like, for me watching them, like, nah, like, fuck him. Like, yeah, like, Shiki should just kill this dude. Like, why is this guy still walking around? I mean, the stuff that they did to Fujino, and obviously, logically, it must have done to other people, that and other awful things. Like, fuck this guy. But
right,
Mikia
but this is the question, because boundaries exist for a reason, right? Because if I agree with that, but I also think, like, of course, if you were to run a society that way,
yes,
nothing could work, right? You have to have some kind of like way of like a rehabilitative way of addressing crime, because just killing everyone who does this crime, no matter how evil, and this is about as evil as a crime gets, that won't actually stop the crime in the future or make the world better from what has happened, right? And that is also, like, I think the movie's pushing you to think about that there are these dual impulses. It is the boundaries of catharsis, right? Like, even if this person on some level deserves it, and on some level, absolutely, these people fucking deserve it, you then also feel the revulsion of actually going to that place, the like dual catharsis and revulsion, and also the sense that nothing is really solved from it, right? I think it means that, like, my one like thing that was kind of like worrying me throughout this whole movie is like, I don't really want this to end with Shiki brutally murdering this girl who has been so brutalized, right? Like, feels like it's off. And the movie and the novel know that, because what this actually ends with is Shiki using the violence to cut out the actual pain that this person has had, or some part of it. We can talk about that symbol, but what ultimately, there is a more productive use of retribution that happens at the end of this that hopefully resets or ends the cycle, is kind of where it goes to.
Yeah. And it is like that, that question of that notion that if you don't die like a human, does that mean that you ever were a human, right? If this is your end point, that you are now a lump of meat, and your life has now been touched by something that is in this context, like, literally unnatural, something that is magical, that is fantastical, that exists in the world of, like, the Nasuverse, right? On the other side of this boundary, some kind of boundary that exists. That does that mean that you are ever truly human? And she is like pushing these people into, like, Fujino is pushing these people into this literal, like, you are literally dehumanized. You are no longer have a human form, shape, or life, or existence. Like, how allowable is that, right? And, like, from Shiki's perspective, where Shiki herself seems to be on a boundary, right? Like, her doing that, she is both, I think, kind of like, she's bantering with Fujino, but I think there's something about the way that she is doing it where there's a disapproval in the way that Fujino is doing what she is doing, right? And that disapproval reaches a, like, culmination point when Fujino finally lashes out at an unrelated bystander because, where she was crossing the street and almost got hit by a car, and kills the guy off screen. You have an amazing line by Touko just on the phone. This is like, What do you mean? It was just a fender bender and the guy's head got twisted off. It was just like a very vivid image. Luckily we don't, and the movie knows well enough not to try to relish in this random guy's pain who just happened to get basically in the crossfire, where Fujino is now kind of out of control because of how much pain she's in. And that's the thing that finally pushes Shiki over the edge. But you get that sense that Shiki cares a lot about murder, as like a weird of a turn, like thing that is to say, it's important to her. The idea of like to go about it the proper way, and like death is very, very important to her. And as we learn in this and the next movie, like she literally can see death, and she lives with death inside of her to a certain extent. And so it is really important to her that it is respected to a certain extent. And that's something that Fujino, in her like sort of wild, pained rage, is not respecting.
Yeah, it's one of the ways in which everything we've seen so far is so clearly meant to be seen, or at least deeply thought through a second time, right?
Yes.
Because all of this stuff in this movie, Shiki, like, I think there's a very good, clear reason why this is placed before Chapter 4, but part of that is that you are meant to be a little confused at, like, where does this anger Shiki has towards Fujino, who in every other respect is very sympathetic in this story, where does that come from? And when you see part 4 and you read it back, it does make a lot of sense. And I think what it's saying about death and killing and retribution and all these things is very interesting and complicated, and Shiki's point of view is very valid when you kind of know what's going on. And it's just, again, it's something that there are so many benefits to the way this is ordered, and one of those is I think it makes you look at difficult situations and think and rethink them in that sort of sense.
Yeah, it gives you these kind of like multiple points of view, and like, as you say, like allows you to self-reevaluate what is going on as you're presented new information, right? This part of like the metaphor I talked about last time of like it is like a puzzle, right? And you're getting your different pieces and you're trying to find ways to fit them. And then once you fit them all, you can step back and admire the completed puzzle. And then now every time for me, rewatching all these, like this is my, like, I know the whole puzzle. I've seen the whole puzzle. So now that is all I see when I look at these different movies, is I'm seeing everything as it fits into place. And that's like a very, very, like, I think delicate balance and like interesting trick of writing and storytelling to structure things just perfectly to where the first time through, when you're just looking at the pieces, it's disorienting enough that it is a legitimate disorientation, but not so disorienting that it's like off-putting, and instead is like intriguing. You want to keep on going and find the next puzzle piece because you're not kind of thrown out of the experience. It is drawing you subtly deeper into the experience.
And it's so interesting because, like, at its most fundamental level so far, and I'm assuming this is true going forward, the basic shape of Kara no Kyoukai is fairly familiar. It's a group of, like, paranormal investigators paranormally investigating, right?
Yes.
Like, I have seen that in and out of anime, and I can imagine watching some of these scenes, like where they're all hanging out at their headquarters or something, the more sort of normal case of the week, where you might even, this is like 25-minute episodes, and you can have a fun case of the week that's like a little gnarly and a little thoughtful. And of course, the distance between that and what this show actually is so cavernous that it's obviously intentional. It's taking this like shape and contorting it and twisting it and making you look at it from a completely different vantage point. And that's part of what's so interesting about it.
Yeah, as you say, like there is some like parallel universe, like supernatural police procedural version of Kara no Kyoukai. Yeah, where you've got like
there's the Kara no Kyoukai NBC adaptation where they just make it a police show every week.
Yeah, and Mikia's like your everyman audience surrogate. Touko's like the police chief, who's like always kind of on the edge. And then Shiki is your like cool, like the enforcer character that's with, your feet on the ground, like actually getting shit done. It is a very familiar structure, as you say, that has now been, twisted very, appropriately enough for this movie, like so far out of shape that it isn't until movies 3 or 4 that you kind of realize that's what it is. I mean, I didn't even realize until I rewatched movie 4 that you didn't even know technically that Touko was a fucking mage. Like, no, you don't know that she uses magic and shit like that isn't a thing until episode 4. And so yes, it is interesting the way in which it kind of disguises some of like the genre standards that it is actually using, because it's so out of structure that you can't identify it until you get deep enough into the series.
Yeah. And now I just love imagining coming to and leaving NBC this fall, The Garden of Sinners starring Mariska Hargitay as Shiki. It's going to be great. No. But back to like this specific story. There's the entire issue about Fujino's wound. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because we have, it's a mysterious wound. We then find out it's a knife wound, that she was stabbed. Then we find out she wasn't stabbed, and it must be an untreated ruptured appendicitis. And then it's something that Shiki is able to remove, and she's going to live. And that whole like transformation threw me for a loop in several ways. And it is because the symbol it starts at is fairly obvious, and one that I've seen in other stories, and then morphs into other places,
Yeah, I mean, because it starts as this sort of like phantom pain, which I think is what it is meant to be. Ultimately, right. It is representative of the trauma, like the psychological and spiritual trauma that she has undergone.
Right. Even if she can't feel physical pain, it lives in the body somehow.
Yes. Yeah. And it has ruptured, right? Like it has literally, in this sense, with like how it has been symbolized as an appendix, and appendicitis, it has literally ruptured. Like the pain and the suffering and the psychological and spiritual trauma that she has suffered has reached the point where it has exploded. And so it has exploded within her body, and it is killing her, right? And I think it's like an interesting, you get this sort of like series of steps of trying to unravel what is this pain that she's feeling, because also, there's a good chunk of the movie where you have maybe figured out, because of some of the way that things were depicted, that she couldn't feel pain. But like you don't explicitly learn that until like the halfway through the movie, basically, until you finally get some of that exposition stuff that starts putting all that into context for you, and Kokutou realizes it, and then Touko starts talking you through what that like philosophically and like experientially might mean for her. But then this mystery of her, moving between these different states of sometimes regaining her insensitivity to pain, right? That's one of the reasons why Shiki backs off that one time, is because she sees that Fujino is in this kind of like state of flux where she's moving between this, and it's like when she can feel pain, she can use her powers. When she can't feel pain, she can't anymore. So she becomes like quote unquote normal again. She is on that boundary, right, of the title. And it is until like all this builds up so much, because she can't get any catharsis, she can't get any release, right? And arguably, as they say, like even if she killed Keita, it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't actually provide the catharsis that she wants. But because she couldn't kill Keita, it means that she is on this long spree and out into the world. Until eventually it all bursts, and now she is like constantly in pain, until it can get stabbed out of her with Shiki's powers.
It's a really interesting thing that I think I've seen this series do in a couple of places in these first few episodes, where it winds up giving you a fairly like expositionally complicated explanation for the sort of the metaphor and the idea, but the metaphor does still have this sort of like basic idea that sort of survives through the layers of exposition. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but it's what I kind of get, and I think that explanation is right on the money, because it's intentionally throwing you for a loop, but it's also not necessarily fundamentally undermining what the basic idea you kind of start with is. It's interesting in that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting process, because I think there is always meant to be this like symbolic reading that for the audience stays true throughout the whole thing. And as the explanations change, it modulates the symbolism a little bit, and I think it puts it more into perspective and clarifies it a little bit. But then there is, as you say, there's like a more kind of complicated detectively series of like actual real world facts that the main characters follow as they are trying to piece together what this is in a more practical sense, because they don't exist in the world of symbolism. They exist as actual people in an actual world. Even with fantasy stuff, there are still reasons for why these things happen.
Right. And ultimately there's this, part of it I think also is that the multiple layers of complication we sort of throw into it in that real world sense reflects something about the lack of simplicity to any of this, of the discussion we're having, the lack of like a direct one-to-one causal, like something that is easy enough to like identify and cut out, and that, okay, if it's a stab wound, how could she still be moving around? If it's appendicitis, it's a burst and it's going to kill her, and all of these different things. How do you read the ultimate ending here, where Shiki cuts this thing out of her? I think, having seen episode 4, it seems like this is a like death element that she's able to like kind of get rid of, and then this person has sort of life left in them. Is that basically what's happening there?
Yes, yeah. So Shiki has the mystic eyes of death perception, which you have to be very specific with how you pronounce that, because it is not, they are not the mystic eyes of depth perception.
We all have those.
Yes. But although that is an intentional pun. So in Japanese, they have intentionally tried to replicate a pun that exists in Japanese. Although the Japanese pun is a little bit, I think, more elegant, as it typically is, because it's using kanji stuff. In Japanese, it's called chokushi no magan, which means like the mystical eyes of direct death would be the most direct way to translate it. But chokushi, which in this case is using the kanji for direct and death, the more standard word you would have that's pronounced chokushi would be direct sight or direct seeing, which literally means to stare at, chokushi. So there's a little bit of a pun on that idea. But yeah, so Shiki can see death, like the concept of death that is, and it's not just literally death, and it's like, oh, I see death in you, in like a person or an animal or living things, and that all things, including concepts, anything that has a beginning has an ending, right? So the perspective for like in the Nasuverse is that all things have a death conceptually engraved into them, like as an entity, as a concept, as a being. Shiki can see that and perceives it and is able to interact with it physically and able to seeing it visualized as these lines. If she traces the lines with her knife or whatever, or like her finger, I think she could still do it with, it will like activate this death that she envisions in the concept of the thing. So she is able to kill people that way. She's able to kill the ghosts in episode 1 that way. In episode before, you have the scene where she kills the zombie corpse that she identifies as like, oh yeah, it's dead, but it is still a living corpse. It still exists. It is moving. It has a beginning. Therefore, it must have an end. And she activates what that end is conceptually for the thing. And so she's also able to use that to kill her appendicitis, or like to kill the poison in her body from the burst appendix using her powers. So she's able to perceive the end of that and activate its death. And so she is like, she kills the pain inside of Fujino, which then presumably restores her insensitivity to pain. And I remember correctly, she also does pop up in movie 6. So we will see Fujino again later in the timeline as well. So we will revisit this character. But that is like
Fujino reverts before. That's why Shiki goes for this non-fatal killing the poison instead of the person, because Shiki again has this like hard boundary for herself of like, well, if she has the insensitivity, she doesn't have the violence, I can't kill her because that's not the thing that did the bad stuff that I want to blah blah blah, right?
Yeah. So she kills the pain inside of her with her mystic eyes of death perception. So that is like literally what happens. Whereas I think, as you said, like symbolically, it is about one. I think it's about Shiki like seeing that this is a person worth saving, right? And this is a person that does exist, that shouldn't exist in the same world as Shiki, right? There's a lot of paralleling across the whole movie about how Shiki and Fujino are very similar, and they're also extremely different. They both have mystic eyes. I don't remember how much these movies get into the specifics of how some like the magic stuff works, but like, this is a thing that like some people inherit these traits. It's almost vaguely Naruto-esque, which also has like a bunch of crazy eye stuff, right? Because there's a lot of cultural things that go into that. But some people have these mystic eyes that have different abilities. They're extremely rare and very, very powerful in this world. Shiki and Fujino are both from families that inherit these lines, or these eyes, right? Different eyes. So they talk about how Fujino is she's a branch family from the Asagami family that has these mystic eyes, and she has happened to inherit them. Shiki, this is part of why her house is so weird, and we'll learn more about it, right? She has this weird, crazy manner in the fucking bamboo forest and all that shit. She comes from this long line of a family that can inherit these powers, and she just happens to have inherited these. And so there's that paralleling, right? There's a paralleling with like their relationship with Mikia, that both of them, we find out that Fujino met Mikia once and has like actually a crush on him from like some sort of sports tournament when She would have been in middle school and he was in high school helping out. That scene is a lot more detailed in the book. It's a much more kind of like tangential here. But you have that. And so you've got like this relationship to Mikia that Shiki has an ongoing one. Fujino like kind of crosses path, but didn't really have someone like Mikia in her life to kind of help her and guide her and like care for her as she exists in this weird sort of liminal stage. So you get these like similarities, but also these profound differences. And I think it ultimately comes down to like Fujino doesn't really belong on this side, on the same side that Shiki is. She shouldn't be here. She should be over there living a normal life. And that's, I think, part of also what Shiki cuts out of her. Like Shiki has to live with all the things that she is. Whereas like Fujino shouldn't have to do that.
Yes, absolutely. It's really interesting. One thing I like about how, because obviously you having like read the text, there's more explanation of all these things, right? I think one thing that Ufotable does to like visually illustrate this that I love is that the characters in the anime have their eyes are notably different than most anime eyes because they don't have pupils. They're like kind of solid colors. And then when you see the mystic eyes, you get much more sort of traditional anime eyes that have like the kind of colored iris and then the inner circle, and they have this kind of digital glow that they've added and stuff. But I think that's the kind of first sign that Shiki and Fujino are sort of linked on that level, is the way they do the eye illustrations, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And one other, while I'm thinking about one other interesting note with the Mystic Eyes of Death perception is, I think I talked about last time a little bit of like Nasu likes to revisit certain like themes and ideas and archetypes and evolve them in his work. This will be a thing we will see when we get to Fate Stay Night and Heaven's Feel and some of that stuff. You will see sequences and ideas that are very similar to some of the stuff we see in this movie that are like evolved and have changed. One of those, like the most obvious thing that is like that in his work is the main character of Tsukihime, the visual novel that, remember, the light novels that Kata no Kyoukai were written first, then Tsukihime comes out. The main character of Tsukihime is called Shiki Tono, and Shiki Tono also has Mystic Eyes of Death perception. They work slightly differently, but and them working slightly differently is part of him like exploring the same concept with a different character in a slightly different genre. In that instance, it's like a dating sim is a weird word to use for it, but a romance visual novel kind of thing with different romanceable heroine characters. So this is one of the ideas that he revisits multiple times, the Mystic Eyes, the specific idea of being able to see death and what that means and being able to interact with death in a conceptual way. These are like themes that he likes to iterate on throughout his work.
That's really interesting. That I so want to like read some of these different visual novels because it sounds so fascinating to me. Obviously, we're going to get a deep dive in some of the Fate Stay Night stuff very soon. But yes, that's fascinating. But yeah, and again, just the way Ufotable has done this with like, there is such a good visual sensibility to all of this. And how it illustrates a lot of these concepts there is a lot of dialogue, obviously. Touko is a very talkative character in particular, but so much of this is just done through sort of mood and atmosphere. I think the music plays a big role in it, all of that.
Yeah, God. I mean, you have the whole like big climactic fight of this movie, which is definitely of like, so far we haven't gotten a lot of the action stuff. You get some of the action stuff in the first movie. And then there's a lot in this one. There's not really much action in the second movie. There's a little bit at the end of the fourth movie. We'll get some more of that, like, you'll get some more of like the Ufotable style action stuff you'd more expect in like movie 5 and stuff. But you do get a really good action climax here. And the very end of it, Fujino on the ground collapsed and Shiki straddles her with the knife. And then Fujino like explodes basically, right? She just screams magare, 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 like twist, 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 twist. And then it zooms out to the whole bridge, and the bridge like starts to twist, so and the all the windows shatter and everything as the music swells. It's a really that's a very iconic scene from the series. So much so that it was Fujino is actually one of the characters they brought into Fate Grand Order in a crossover event, so she's like an unlockable character you could play as, and that is the sequence they use basically for her ultimate attack, where she screams magare, 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 and it literally like it goes to the bridge scene, it zooms out, the bridge twists. What that means and how that works is too complicated to talk about. How the fuck any of that shit works in FGO, and like how she is able to conceptually put everything into a bridge and twist the bridge, it's a bigger conversation. But that is like the scene they use because it's a very iconic moment from this movie.
it's a phenomenal scene of almost like a disaster movie thing, right? Because you've got this entire giant bridge twisting and falling apart, and you've got Shiki and Fujino both kind of lost in the debris and everything that's going on. It's a real showstopper. It's an incredible sequence. I wanted to highlight that, so I'm glad you did. It's so good.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about catharsis, like that to me is a very cathartic moment of where like that's where it feels like how like unfair everything is and unreasonable everything is that has happened to Fujino, who has not asked for any of this. All this has been stuff inflicted and imposed upon her. Again, even her original insensitivity to pain and stuff is not a thing that she was born with. It is a thing that that was done to her by her father, a father that is then trying to have her killed. That's something else you learn, right? So that's another one of those symbols or like ideas that gets in the fold, is like the way in which her life has been controlled by these like cruel men who believe that they have some right over her body, whether it is her father when she was a child who makes a choice to repress her powers and do this thing to her, or now trying to like have her life be taken, or these awful men that she met that have been assaulting her repeatedly, that like her whole life has been defined that way. And she had this one brief encounter with our like nice protagonist boy, Mikia, who was very like nice to her, had his little line about how, you know, pain isn't a thing you should have to endure. It is a thing that you should be complaining about, which is more poetic in Japanese because it rhymes the two words tairu and utairu he uses. I think that was like a hard line to translate the way it works in Japanese. But she has that one brief moment, but then never has anyone else like that in her life to like help her and guide her. And so all of that like comes to the forefront, right? Because when she's having this flashback to that sports meet scene and meeting Mikia again after she has awakened to her powers and killed like 5 people, so she can't. You know, it's one of the tragedies that she has like happened to encounter him after it is now too late for her to go back to that kind of life and do something about it. And so all of that is going through her head, and then she destroys the whole bridge, and that's like such a powerful moment of catharsis of this is fucked up, this is wrong, this is unfair, everything that has happened, just the whole world should be destroyed. And that's like, I think, what you get in that moment.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is a great combination of like visual spectacle and action, and then also, you know, with just the plot of this thing and the story and the emotions and the themes of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Anything else to say about this movie specifically before we talk about movie 4 and obviously how they interrelate, because it's pretty heavy?
Yes. I mean, one, you know, this is also, we see how Shiki loses her arm, which is very upsetting.
This was funny to me because when she gets hit, Shiki is so like non-responsive. She takes it so in stride that her arm has been destroyed that I was unsure. Okay, is this the reason she has a prosthetic arm, or was the prosthetic arm the thing that was hit, and we haven't seen her get the prosthetic arm? And what it is that she's a fucking badass, and of course gets her arm twisted in that mode, and then it's just like, hey, could you cut this off and make a prosthetic for me? It's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, and I love Touko's like the super nonchalant like tone that Touko takes with it. Also, she's like, oh yeah, that's great. Like, yeah, I'll make you a cool prosthetic. It's like, you know, I always thought you needed something cool to go with your missing eyes and death perception. So I'll make you like a cool robot arm that can grab spirits, I think is what she says. And then I really love the very ending of this movie. Like, it kind of feels like it's setting you up to go into the 4th movie, is that little conversation between Shiki and Mikia, where she says, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit of a murderous impulse towards you, and she gives him this like very like innocent smile after saying that, which is like the most Shiki moment possible. It's like, you know what, I'm starting to feel like I want to kill you, Kokutou. And then she smiles at him. I mean, so it's like, it's the first genuine smile I've ever seen since she woke up from that coma, and that's like what leads you into the 4th movie,
which is about her waking up from that darn coma.
Yes.
This is fascinating to me. So I want to talk about the structure here because, you know, it's actually not that complicated when you look at it. Like, it's very out of order if you kind of look at the numbers, but it's basically an episode that is sort of a investigate. The first episode is sort of a in medias res we're in the main brunt of the story, and they do an investigation, but we don't have any backstory. Then it's part 1 of the backstory. Then it's another one of those investigations set a little before the first one we saw. Then it's part 2 of the backstory. It's actually very smooth and I think smart as a structure. It feels very disorienting, and I think why it feels so disorienting is that they've completely reversed sort of, I think, your usual sensibility of sort of how exposition works, and that anything that is explained in this series, you wind up having seen in action first. And so you have some kind of understanding of it. So like before you get any literal explanation of what Shiki is doing in seeing the seams of things, in touching death, in eliminating and cutting out death and all of that, you've seen her do it, and you've seen a visual, in the film version at least, representation of it, and you have some kind of like, you probably can't verbalize what this thing is that is happening, but you have some measure of understanding of it, and then it is verbalized in the following episode, most of these things in episode 4, and there's all sorts of things like that. Like, I might be off base on this, but my sense is that all those scenes in episode 1 where Shiki is walking around alone at night, she's not actually walking around alone, because she sees this whole other world that we see in episode 4, where she sees spirits and lines and all this stuff. It looks empty to us, but it probably isn't to her. And that's the whole thing, is like you get this sense of her behavior, and you get a sense of who she is as a person and how she moves through the world, and then you get an exposition for it later. That's not unheard of in storytelling, obviously. Often you have kind of a show don't tell sort of thing, but I like how this really reverses causality in a way that makes it more interesting. And also, because the ideas are so out there, mystic eyes of death perception, like literally, like you can see the lines of death and the seams and all of that. That's a crazy idea. It's a hard idea. I think if you were to introduce that with exposition, it would feel like gobbledygook. I think because you reverse sort of the narrative order here, it actually, you are able to engage with it much more smoothly, I think.
Yeah, and I think, I like that, because it does, like, you have no choice but to sort of get used to it, right? You have to become like accustomed to the tone and style of the world, and then once you're sort of like immersed in it, then it gives you those explanations. Because I'm with you that I think if you just threw immediately at the audience, here's the mystic eyes of death perception, this is what Shiki is, I mean, one, it would just bog down the beginning of the story so much with super, super heavy exposition. But then it also, as you say, it would kind of sound too much like fantasy gobbledygook, whereas we know who Shiki is now. We like care about her as a character. There's lots of things we don't understand about her, but there are lots of little things that you pick up about her, whether you realize it or not, that are informing your perception, that then is getting like reevaluated and evolved as you get these different pieces filled in. Right. And part of that is also like the way that she speaks, which the movie 4 is really critical for, right?
Yes.
You have these different versions of her, the way that she speaks in the modern day timeline. You have the 2 different versions of her in movie 2. And then in movie 3, you get this a little bit of talk at the end about like Shiki, all quote unquote, like all caps Shiki, or the male Shiki persona that seems to not be there. Is you get a hint of that at the end of movie 3. And then movie 4, you learn what that means. And you see the Shiki like between those 2 states of her trying to sort of, her leaving behind the persona you saw in movie 2, her moving into the persona that we are already familiar with in movies 1 and 3 that she sort of claims at the end of the 4th movie.
Yes. But we literally see the identity constructed because, and I like that, like the moment that for me kicked this all into gear was when she cuts the hair off. And she is like, she's thrown the knife, and the first thing she does is alter her body in a way that sort of claims a new sort of like composite identity and becomes that sort of more androgynous figure we see in 1 and 3, where like gender is hard to pinpoint on her, and she'd had this very split, divided gender between the 2 Shikis, male and female. Like they really go heavy on that in movie 4. Like let's not call her all caps or him all caps Shiki. Let's say they're Shiki-kun, because that's what Touko always calls him, using that's a male honorific, Shiki-kun, a male like younger honorific. And so you have Shiki-kun and you have Shiki, and now they kind of, there's some composite of that going on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things I found very interesting is, in my memory, movie 4 did not like stand out a lot. And rewatching it, this might be actually my favorite of the 4 movies we've watched so far.
It's fantastic
on rewatch. Like I just had like, I think, forgotten about like a lot of what. Like, I remembered that this is the one with her in the hospital, and this is where you get some of the explanations, but I have just forgotten about, like, the tone and the style, and this is the one that, to me, is the most visually impressive. It's got so many fascinating visuals, and I think that's one of the things that makes this whole, like, trick work, is that when you get to this fourth movie, this movie is technically full of exposition, right? It is full of the like cause for the effect that we have already seen in movies 1 and 3, right? Like, this is how we get this character to the thing we have seen in movies 1 and 3. And in lots of stories, that would be a really boring thing, because it's like, well, I don't care about what the cause is, because we've already spent so much time with the effect. Like, what's the point of giving the exposition or the setup for the payoff that we have already seen? But here they make it so rich and engaging, and part of it pushing it into this like very kind of metaphysical space, which this is the most metaphysical feeling of all of them, with multiple sort of like pseudo psychedelic sequences of Shiki in her consciousness, like on the literal boundary of nothingness, right? The Kata no Kyoukai of the title of the show. Like, this is where you're like seeing it be visualized effectively for you. I found movie 4 like absolutely riveting. And it shows how like effective this like weird structure they go for is, that you're able to get that exposition technically set up step in movie 4 out of sequence, but have it be arguably like the best of the 4 movies we've seen so far.
So yeah, I totally agree. I don't know which one I would say like is my personal like favorite or best. I would have to like see these again and think about it. But it is extremely striking, and I think it's so clear. Like, you would not make this stretch of story the same way if you were doing it in sequence, right?
Yes.
Like, you could technically watch these in the order of 2, 4, 3, 1, which is the order they chronologically happen in. It would work, but like, they were made out of that order, and it's so clear that like this stage, which is like the key exposition, like almost end of first act of a story stage, right? Where like you've now revealed the character, their motivations, who they are. Now they're going to go out into the world and have their adventure. This is almost like, if in an almost hero's journey-esque sense, this is the movie where Shiki answers the call, right?
Yeah.
And that's the end of the film. But if you were to do that in place as like the second movie, or as the second half of the first batch of the story, you would have to emphasize things very differently. You wouldn't be able to make it as interestingly metaphysical. You wouldn't be able to make it as sort of emotive as it is. And because this is coming at the end of all of this stuff, like we've seen parts of the second act of this story already, and now we're going back and finishing the first act. You're just attuned to it in a very different way, and they're able to do these extremely dynamic scenes. Because this is also the shortest episode. This is 45 minutes, but it's 45 minutes with credits and some after credits scenes. So it's really like under 40 for the main action of the episode. And the main action is pretty simple. It's Shiki's in the hospital. There was a car accident, and she wakes up, and she has this vision that, is kind of, it makes her want to claw her eyes out. And then you have Touko come in and kind of set her straight and figure it out, and then she accepts it at the end. It's a very simple, like, layer of story in that sense, but they're able to really flesh it out and make it, just, again, so incredibly striking. And there's some really virtuosic stuff in the second half of this episode.
Yeah. It's that thing where it's like, honestly, like, this is, I'm pretty sure this is shorter than, for instance, the first episode of Fate Zero. Like, if you take out the post-credit scene and stuff, the first episode of Fate Zero is a double-length episode. They do the same thing for Fate's Day Night. There are a couple of double-length episodes there.
The season 2 premiere of Kimetsu no Yaiba is longer than this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is like, even though this was released in theaters, it is technically a movie. It is like very short. But it's like, but what's interesting is that it's got so little story. Like, you could make this a normal 22-minute episode of anime. Like, you could cover all the story of this easily within a normal episode of, like, a normal run length of a TV episode of anime. But they use this, like, that time to really, like, sit with it. And that's one of the things I love about it. I think it stylistically is much more like the first movie than the second or third. Like, there's very quiet. There's not nearly as much dialogue. The third movie has lots of dialogue, so much that I wish the third movie was a little bit longer, having read the book, because I think there's some stuff that, like, the book's a little bit more sort of luxurious in its pace. Like, it takes a little bit more time to get places. I wish that there was a little bit more dead space in the third movie to play around with. The fourth movie, there's so much just, like, feeling this space of this hospital room and sitting there with Shiki. And then also, you know, getting some of these scenes with Kokutou, not being able to see her and him on his own, the puppy dog, as the two nurses call him, which I love that little scene in the background. But I think one of the things that makes it effective is just you have that sort of dead air to sit with the characters and experience the tone and the vibe of what this, like, basically couple of days of Shiki's life is like waking up from this coma.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the first episode where Shiki sort of feels like the main character because we are in her finally. Like there's an internality that we have access to this time. She is very much a character of surface. Not that she isn't a rich, deep character, but in those first 3 episodes, intentionally, we are at an arm's length removal, and we are kind of questioning what is under the surface of this mysterious person. Here we are brought in and literally like see the world as she sees it, and we see the horror of like that sequence of her like getting hit by the car, which we don't see the actual event. We see like a representation of it, like on a black screen, and blood flies, right? But we see this vision of her like in the land of death. I don't know how else to describe it, but like seeing the void this movie makes the concept of, as if the concept of death couldn't be scarier. There's something that's like, there's a very palpable horror to it as it is perceived here. And all of that is just so striking. And then she wakes up and she's seeing ghosts, and there's all this extra visual data because she's seeing death on everything. And then she goes into like, we don't see exactly what she does to her eyes, but it's a very classic anime cut where you cut to black and then do a sound effect.
Yeah.
And it's a classic for a reason. It's, you know, something that many have used. And then, you know, she is literally has her eyes closed off from the world for most of the remaining episode. It's virtuosic. It really is.
Yeah. And I think one of the things of the out of sequence storytelling that's really useful is that it allows you to get into Shiki's head, right? It's because you both know like who she was before this point in movie 2, even if there's like, you know, there's obviously lots of mystery of like what's going on with those killings, all that kind of stuff. But then you also know, what is she like after this point? Who does she become after this is something you also know. And so I think, you know, you're able to preserve the mystique of Shiki as a character because there is still an ongoing mystique to her. But because you have both those sort of either sides of this character filled out from a distance, now that you're in this midpoint, like you as the audience are in a position of privilege over the character. You know where she is going and she does not yet. So you have like an almost more kind of like paternal kind of perspective you can take or like parental perspective you can take on her, because I know where you're going. I know you're going to be okay. Like you're going to eventually, you know, you're going to be reunited with Mikia. You're going to become a badass with a knife, and you're going to be killing ghosts and shit. Like, you know where she's heading. And I think that allows you to kind of be in this moment of like real vulnerability with Shiki without it destroying the bigger mystique of the character.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I just think it's so interesting to see, because this is a middle point between the person she was and the person she becomes, and we have access to both of those. And so the real drama of the episode isn't, is she going to survive and get her eyesight back and all of that? We know, and I think if you were telling this in a more conventional order or as a normal 25-minute of television, that would be the tension, right? It's something like, okay, she's been hit by a car and she's been in a coma and she's tried to claws her eyes out. Is she going to be okay? That's taken off the table. It's more like, what is the specific thing that's going to drive her to become the person we see in these other movies, you know? And so, like, that's why the big triumphant moment of this episode is the getting the knife and cutting the hair and all of that. And this is combined in, I think this is the most maybe virtuosic moment in the series so far, it's a moment that sadly is mangled on the Crunchyroll version of the episode, but it is where you have her kind of in the fight and you have Kokutou in the office where he goes into the room with all the prosthetics. It's a very creepy room. And there's this like doll that I know you probably can't tell. I'm sure this is going to come up again, but it almost seems to me like it's a doll of like the evil, like Shiki-kun male Shiki or something. But he sits next to it and he starts singing in the Rain. the song from the musical. And it's completely a cappella. There's no music under it. He also had hummed it in episode 2 to her in that scene we talked about last time. And he's singing, and we see these memories of them. We also see her on that boundary. We see these things kind of flash together, and then it comes and ends in, you know, the hair cutting and like getting into the action of it. And it's such a amazing sequence. Sadly, and I didn't even realize this until the Crunchyroll version removed Singin' in the Rain, probably for rights issues, although I'm a little confused by that. I can tell you why. But they removed it, but they left the subtitles in, so I knew something was off, and I went and torrented the episode and found the actual version, and it's incredible. And they also had fucked it up in movie 2 because of this.
Yes, and I had maybe been watching how I had watched these movies originally. I was not actually watching these on Crunchyroll, so I did not realize, and I had forgotten, because I think I had forgotten that it was Singing in the Rain, so I didn't even recognize the tune in movie 2, partially because it's one of those things where it's like, it sounds very familiar. I was like, oh, well, it sounds familiar because it's the Kokutou no Kyoukai soundtrack, and I was like, oh wait, no, that's fucking Singing in the Rain. But yes. So I have not seen the Crunchyroll version. So is there just is it just silent with subtitles on screen?
No, so it is it is humming, but it's humming of something like completely nondescript, which is very weird. And in that, I didn't notice it in episode 2, which makes sense. Because in episode 2, it is also humming. Like, it doesn't really ruin it if you don't know it's there, but it's not a knowable tune. It's not like something you would have heard before. But then in this one, it is that same kind of nondescript humming, but it feels like it's off. Like, it just feels like the sound mix is off there because there's just so much. And then, of course, but they left the subtitles for it. So it's still, the subtitles are the lyrics to Singin' in the Rain. Like, I was wondering, is this in the Japanese version, there are Japanese subtitles here, and it's just the lyrics, but it's not the music? Like, what the heck is going on? That's why I went and torrented it and figured it out. And what was this scene? Because something is off, clearly. And yeah, it's Singing in the Rain. I am confused why the rights are in doubt, because that song is 90 years old. I think people know that song from the movie Singin' in the Rain from 1952. A lot of people don't know Singin' in the Rain is a jukebox musical. It's all music that was written for other movies by the Freed unit at MGM, the Arthur Freed unit. And Singin' in the Rain is one of their early hits. That song, is from 1929. It's from the Hollywood Review of 1929, which is that movie ends with a big musical number where it's a big choir singing it, and it's in color. It's one of the first Hollywood sequences in color. It's two-tone Technicolor, so it's that really ugly red and green color scheme. This is before three-strip Technicolor. So I don't understand how that song is under copyright to the degree that it would mess this up, but for some reason it is, I guess, and they had to cut it out for the Crunchyroll version, and it's definitely don't watch that version. It ruins a phenomenal moment.
Yeah, it's a great sequence. First, because also it's I like that it's really like Suzumura Kenichi, is playing Kokutou, is the one singing it, and I think they very intentionally made it don't make it sound like a dude singing. Make it sound like someone quietly singing to themselves, and nobody can quietly sing to themselves and sound good. You can't, because you just can't produce the voice for it if you're trying to sort of do it a little bit under your breath. And so it's a it just feels like he's really close up tight on the mic and just very quietly to himself singing the song. But it's something that adds so much to the tone that it is this very intimate moment you're sharing with him as he's remembering Shiki. Right. And he remembers this line that Touko told him earlier about how the thing you need to do to help her is to treat her the way you always did, pick your relationship back up with her, basically. And it's him remembering that friendship and that relationship and saying that to himself as she in the hospital is fighting a crazy zombie man. But obviously is also finding herself and kind of rebuilding who she is as a person at the same time.
It's such an interesting choice of song, because it's a great song, but it's this weird kind of chintzy love letter song that is, you know, the lyrics are, I'm singing in the rain, what a glorious feeling, I'm happy again, I'm laughing at clouds, so dark up above, the sun's in my heart, and I'm ready for love. But it's like going back out into the world again is the kind of lyrics it is. If you kind of read it a little deeper, you know, it's because they do the whole first verse of all the way down to like the I walk down the lane with a happy refrain, singing in the rain. And, you know, the stormy clouds are going to chase everyone else, but I'm still out here. And it's one of those great uses of a song where they spin it because of the usage in such a way that you see a different depth in it than I think I would have seen from that song before, where it's kind of silly, but it is like it does refer to both Kokutou and Shiki in this moment, right? Of that, like, Kokutou is ready to kind of restart this friendship, and Shiki is literally getting her groove on again. Is her murder groove on, right? And is, like, coming back out. And so it's silly and it's chintzy in that way, but it is also, like, weirdly meaningful. And if he were belting it out, it'd be the cheesiest fucking thing in the world and it wouldn't work at all. But because he's singing it softly to himself and it's just something that's kind of come to mind, and last time it's from this memory where he was humming it while standing near her, and now he's fully vocalizing it. Again, this is, and you combine it with just the amazing kind of, you know, fast editing, you know, visuals that some are part flashback and memory and some are action. It's a really interesting melding of the sort of internal reality of these two characters through this kind of cheesy old song that he's singing to himself almost non-consciously.
Yeah. And then it ultimately culminates, as you say, in her cutting her hair. And then she has a line that I did not remember where this was in the movies, but Shiki is also a character in Fate Grand Order. And I have used her a lot because she is really good in that game and she's super fucking cool. But when you use her special move in that game, she says the line she says here where she kills the zombie. So I've heard it like 1,000 times, you know, the way you do with that kind of line in a video game where she says, Shino katamari ga ore no mai ni tatsun janai. And then in the game, she cuts everybody up and the lines of death appear and it fucking explodes. And she says it here. There's something I love about that. It's like you basically like you know, walking pile of death, like, don't you dare stand in front of me. Like, you're not worthy to stand in front of me. And that's a really big moment because that is also the first time I believe that this version of Shiki has used ore as a personal pronoun. So like she is kind of going, you know, she's on this edge. And so she's saying watashi for most of the fourth film when she's alone in the hospital bed. Again, watashi is like a female personal pronoun. That's the one she used. The female persona of Shiki used in high school. Ore is what the male persona used. The male persona has died seemingly, or is gone, right? And so Shiki is now alone for the first time ever in her life because she doesn't have this sort of like symbiotic alternative personality that coexisted with her. And Touko, you know, has all these interesting explanations about how that stuff worked in this movie. But so she is having to establish for herself what her personality is and who she is now. And that's the moment where she kind of like declares that, because we have seen in movies 1 and 3, she typically uses ore to refer to herself. And that's part of like the androgynous quality of the character. That's why in the first movie, it ends with this moment of Mikia stating that she's a girl. Because he knows from his perspective, this is the female Shiki because the male Shiki died. But we see this as like a more androgynous character because she is like navigating this weird paradigm and she has chosen for whatever reason to speak, to use the same kind of words that male Shiki used to use, but in the much more stoic, stern way that female Shiki speaks. And so it's like a melding of the two different speaking styles that she brings together when she says, ore no mai ni tatsun janai, and cuts the dude apart.
Well, and it's what I love about this whole ending sequence is it is literally her in real time forging her new identity, right? Like, because she is someone, we saw this is kind of the central action of movie 2, is that she's stuck. She like is the heiress to this family, and she is like, her femininity is not something that is really affirmatively chosen, right? It is something that it is a role she has to play as like the lady of this house, wearing the kimono, all of that stuff. But it's also a little confused by like the kendo training and the male Shiki doing his thing in her body and all of that. And in this moment, like cutting the hair, choosing a pronoun, all of these things, like I can see like this, it could be extremely powerfully read as just a clear trans allegory in that way, you know, obviously. But just the basic idea of like melding parts of her identity and being like, this is how I'm going to wear my hair, this is how I'm going to speak, and then this is how I'm going to kick ass. And I like how it kind of melds all of that into this person who, whatever else, however mysterious they are, Shiki in episodes 1 and 3 is very self-confident, I think you could say. There's a sense of self there going on, especially in episode 3, I think you see. She's kept a little more mysterious in episode 1. And I love seeing how that all comes into being.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else have we not covered in this episode, Sean?
I mean, I guess I want to, like, talk a little bit about the visuals of this episode, because I think this is the most visually striking, like alongside the first movie, which was also particularly good looking in terms of how it was directed and stuff. But this movie has it has a little bit more of that kind of UFO table look. It doesn't have as much, as it doesn't have like a lot of big crazy 3D shots and stuff like that, but they're using like 3D enhancements to a lot of sequences to make it look really good. Like all their effects works with the spirits looks so striking. And then in particular, the kind of metaphysical sequences where she is on the boundary of emptiness, right? That visualization of death you were talking about as this like horizon with a weird, almost like eclipse in the middle, and some of the other weird spaces that she like visualizes herself in the coma, are really striking looking. In particular, there's a shot where it's like it's just like kind of these weird clouds, and it almost looks kind of space-esque, and there's like these red clouds around the edge of the frame, and it's something where like they bring that, whatever that effect is, back again at the end, where after she kills the zombie, the sunrise happens, and you get this beautiful shot of like the horizon with the sunrise in the clouds. And I've been looking at it, it's almost like hard to tell, what are you even looking at? Like, is this just 2D animation? Is this like a painting? Is it 3D? Like, and I think it's a combination of a lot of different composite elements put together to create this almost kind of like otherworldly aesthetic, where there's like a depth to some of like the clouds and stuff, and the way that the lighting looks doesn't quite just look like animation. It looks like it has a 3D quality, but there's a very like painterly look to some elements that clearly are totally 2D. And it's just a really beautiful looking like sequences of images that they have that kind of bookend the movie with like the kind of astral weird metaphysics stuff at the beginning, and then that being kind of replicated visually with the images of like the clouds in the sunrise at the very end after she's triumphant. I just found this movie in particular to be quite striking on a visual level.
Oh, it's incredible. And again, like we're in 2008 now. This movie was May 2008. And I think about other anime from 2008, and there's plenty of, you know, extremely impressive stuff. That's the year Miyazaki's Ponyo comes out, but in it's intent different, it's technology different. What Ufotable is doing here in like how to bring in 3D elements to change and evolve and transform sort of the basic style of anime, they're just light years ahead of everyone. It's incredible, like how far they are pushing that. And again, it's through these kind of experiments that we will eventually get stuff like Kimetsu no Yaiba, right? But it's already just so ahead of the curve. Yeah.
So all that stuff I love. One other thing I want to shout out, because we've talked before on the last episode how good Suzumori Kenichi is as Kokutou, and how good especially Sakamoto Maya is as Shiki. But in these two episodes, particularly episode 4, you get a lot more of Touko. And so Honda Takako, who voices Touko, is so good in these movies. And one thing that's interesting about her is that she's much more prolific as like a live action dub actress. Like if you look at her Wikipedia page in particular, it is like a deep list of live action dub credits. And she's done plenty of anime and games and stuff like that. She plays a kind of a character who's more prominent in early Naruto called Anko, but she sticks around. She becomes a less prominent character. So she's in some stuff like Naruto. She's around. And so she's good in what she's in, but she's not really known much as an anime actress. And so her coming in and doing this role, like I just find it so impressive. In particular, in these two movies, you get a lot more of that. Like it's made explicitly clear that she kind of is doing two characters, right? Like Touko is like puts on this like performance seemingly where it's like kind of glasses Touko, and she's like that sometimes on the phone. She's like that when she's very like affable and she's very talkative and she's very friendly. So the first time she comes into Shiki's room, she's like that, and she's very much like playing it up as like, I'm like this nice lady, I'm trying to help you, and like she's she comes as like, hey, hi, how you doing? What's up? Like, that's kind of how she enters the hospital room. But then there's that much more serious, the like mage Touko, like the one, like this is the real one, where she takes off the glasses and she's much more intense. And she has that like severe, like strict logical process by which she like understands and breaks the world down, and this like intensity with which she does it. And those two different versions of the character that she kind of flows between, that I think is reflective also of some of the things that Shiki learns how to do herself, that Touko is much more effective at, and is kind of mastered. I think it's just like a really, really great performance.
Yeah, I mean, this episode is effectively our actual introduction to Touko, because we learn she's a magus, and we learn, like, kind of what her business is and all of that stuff. We see how she and Kokutou sort of get together. It's like a part-time job for him at first that is bit off more than he could chew there. It's kind of crazy, but I love all that. I love that she plays kind of almost a mentor role to Shiki in this, because she has some understanding of what this sort of, like, split is. And yeah, I love looking down Tanako Honda's Wikipedia, because she's the official actor for Mila Jovovich, Halle Berry, Charlize Theron, Hilary Swank, Rosario Dawson, Sandra Bullock. That's a lot of like major Hollywood actors. I think that's that's a big set of roles, and there is kind of it is a slightly different performance than I think you would get from someone who mostly does anime. And it's in some ways the showiest of the performances, at least in these first 4 episodes, because of those different shifts, because she kind of has the biggest personality. But I do, kind of everyone in this is playing multiple characters in some sense, just because of like time passing. Or Maya Sakamoto is like literally playing multiple versions of Shiki and her evolving and changing identity. But it's a hell of a cast.
Yeah, I just want to say, eventually we will do, on our short list of topics we're definitely doing for Japanimation Station is the Mari Okada topic, with like Anohana and stuff like that. And the other really big anime role that Takako Honda has done that is really impressive is she is in Hanasaki Iroha, one of the early shows that Okada wrote, where she plays the main. It's a dual role where she both plays the main character's mother and grandmother. It's very impressive. So it's nice. Like she's a really skilled actress, and has done a lot of other stuff in anime as well that is really good. But this is like the thing. Every time I like have watched this, and this character, it's kind of like it has like some cameo stuff in other spin-offs and things. Like Touko has a larger life in the Nasuverse. We're not going to see much of her in anything past what we're watching for Kata no Kyoukai. She might pop up here or there a little bit. But this character is like easily her most famous and well-known character in anime. And Touko is like a pretty big fan favorite, I think, for a very good reason. It's one of the reasons why that character is brought back up when they do some of the other like spin-offs of the broader kind of magic world or whatever of the Nasu verse. So.
Other things to mention, I love the CG skits on both of these, or not CG, claymation, sorry.
Yeah, claymation skits.
Yeah, the first one, or in part 3, you get an anti-smoking PSA, but the joke is that they're just they're chocolate cigarettes.
Yes.
My favorite part of that, though, is at the very beginning of it, you've got like the cat girl in the audience, does a big meow. My dog does not usually pay attention to what is going on the TV, but when that meow happened, Phoebe like shot up and like looked at the TV and was like, what the fuck is that? I'm like, it's a weird cat girl on the TV, Phoebe. It doesn't make sense to me either. And then in part 4, you get everyone annoying Shiki because they're eating and drinking loudly, and so she pulls out the knife and then fights a big clay cross. I'm not sure what that meant, but I do like these as PSAs.
Yeah, they're very good. All those other characters, by the way, just to give you the context, all the characters in there that are not Kata no Kyoukai characters are other Tide Moon characters. So like the cat girl is called Neko Arc, and she is like a cat version of one of the main characters from Tsukihime and stuff. There's some Fate Stay Night characters in there. So just so you know, like who are all these like mysterious people? Some of them are people that you will come to know eventually. So
wonderful.
Yes, that's what that weird cast is.
I might have to. I had an idea last night watching these. I might have to like cut these out and like get clips of them and start using these like as intros for my screenings at school. Like when I show students movies, it would be so funny to just put these at the beginning as like the pre-roll for the movie. That'd be very fun.
Yeah, because they have no dialogue, so they're just like it's just pure visual gags and storytelling. So they would definitely work that way.
Yeah, no smoking, kids. There's lots of reasons not to smoke. We're in a school, but yeah, no smoking.
Man, that would be crazy if a kid tried to start smoking in the middle of like a school viewing.
I've seen people vape. That happens, definitely. I've not seen anyone light up a cigarette. That would be an extra level of like,
like just saying, you just don't give a fuck, huh?
I love it. Especially weird because in my living memory, you could do that. But oh well. Anyway, the world has changed fast. So, okay, we've got that. The ending songs, two fucking bangers. I mean, they all are by Kalafina, but I particularly love the one for part 4, Aria, which I listened to again today. Just, oh man, what a banger.
Yeah, Aria is definitely one of my favorites. Kizu Ato, which is the number 3 one, is also very good. But yeah, I think of the ones we've done so far, Oblivious and Aria are like but I've listened to those songs a lot because they're really good.
Yes.
So
and I've been listening to them, and I think the lyrics on Scars I really liked, and I think the way they reflect the movie is really beautiful. Aria, just the way it's kind of the same as Oblivious, the way it kind of plays with either literally the musical themes from the episode or just the general sort of like dark choral tone that Yuki Kajiura uses is like really striking, and it just is like this song kind of exemplifies Kara no Kyoukai.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's conceptually, I would just love everything about how the music works, right? That you have that she created this band basically to make music for these movies that then like was so successful that they get their own albums. And what a hell of like basically a first album, because their first album is more or less all their ending themes for Kara no Kyoukai and then a couple of other songs. But then also part of it is that obviously Kalafina does all of the choral work in the main soundtrack, of which there is a lot. And so that's just like more things should do something like that because it's so cool. It creates such a unified feel to the music. Because even, in some of her other projects where you have like a good like original ending theme that feels like a natural extension of the themes you heard, the musical themes and the narrative themes in the movie, something like Homura. But you don't necessarily have, like, Lisa's voice isn't playing all throughout the soundtrack of that movie. And stylistically, I don't know if it necessarily needs to. But there is something very cool about having that unity of it is both a thematically appropriate original song that is in the style of and using some of the musical leitmotifs of the main movie. Also, throughout the movie, you are hearing the choral, like, vocal stylings of that band that sings the ending credit song, too.
Yeah, it's very striking. I can't imagine ever turning off, in the middle of the credits, one of these movies. I'm going to sit there and listen to it and read the lyrics, and it's great.
Yes. And then particularly for this one, it's good to watch after it because you have a pretty meaty post-credit scene that sets up movie 5. That I particularly want to mention just because it's very notable that it is the first time we have heard the incredible, deep, sonorous voice of Nakata Joji, who is an actor we are going to hear a lot of because he is in literally every single thing that we are watching because he's an actor that they like to come back to. He plays a very, very prominent character in Fate Zero and the same character in Fate Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works, and so on and so forth, Heaven's Feel. And he also plays a character in the 5th. He's the main villain or whatever, like the other main prominent character in movie 5. And we get to hear a little bit of him at the end because he is this mysterious figure that has been setting up some of the foes that Shiki has fought in the first movie, the third movie, and another character that we will encounter again later that he also, we get set up. We see briefly in that post movie scene. And it's just, as soon as I heard his voice, I'm like, yes, he's finally here. Because again, we're going to hear a lot of this guy, and it's so good.
I think it's a really good use of a post-credits scene because there is this sense, you get to the end of episode 4, you get to the credits, and it's like, okay, the table is set. I think I understand this. I can read back into episodes 1 and 3. There's some mysteries remaining, like what was going on with all that fucking murder in episode 2. Yeah. But I do have a very clear sense, like for our next mystery of the week, whatever it will be, I know these characters and where they're coming from. And it feels like clearly we're moving into part 2 of whatever this story is. And I think having that sense and then getting this heretofore unintimated sense that there is another villain out there who's kind of pulling the strings, really, I really wanted to just move on and watch the big movie that is part 5, because I'm very excited to see what they do. Like, it makes a lot of sense to me that after this episode, the next one is the big full feature-length 2-hour movie, because it feels like it's time to really cut loose. And I've heard good things about episode 5 from you and others, so
I'm super, super excited for the next episode. I mean, there is a reason why I like reordered the way we were doing these to clear the plate so that episode 5 could be its own episode, because I looked at it, I was like, there's no way we're doing like 2 movies and like one of them is episode 5. So yes, next time on Japanimation Station, we will be diving into the 5th movie for Kata no Kyoukai, The Paradox Spiral.
Japanimation Station. のみんなに注目